Ms. Barrett.
Thank you. Before the break, we were discussing the disciplinary system in Police Scotland. I've got just two more questions on that topic before I move on to another topic. So the first is in relation to an example you gave in your evidence this morning to do with stereotyping. And you talked about a person walking through an airport being judged as a possible drug dealer or a terrorist, when in fact it's just a black woman walking through the airport. My question is, where stereotypical assumptions like that translate into conduct, so for example a police officer stops that black woman walking through the airport based on a stereotypical assumption rather than a real events or suspicion, is there scope for using the 2014 conduct regulations to address that conduct based on stereotyping?
I don't know if it has ever been used and would be considered, because the assumption now is that it's not random, it's intelligence-led. I don't know how many people have been forced to say what intelligence you have on this person. There are no figures to say that, and unless a member of the public comes along and says that, I wouldn't be made aware of that.
And the second question is, do you think there would be merit in moving responsibility for the disciplinary processes as a whole away from Police Scotland into an independent body sitting outside Police Scotland?
I think there's a place for that, for sure. There will be the worry that an independent person might not have the technical knowledge to know what to look for about the police systems and stuff. But I actually do think and there should be an independent oversight of some of the cases involving people from different races. I think it's terribly important that some of it look out with Police Scotland. Terribly important.
Thank you. So I'm going to move on to the topic of recruitment, retention and promotion. And can we look back at your witness statement, please? Which is SBPI, you have it. And can we go to page 9 and look at question 18? So at question 18, you were asked, how does race impact recruitment of officers and staff to Police Scotland? And just over the top of page 10, you gave a bullet point list of the factors affecting members of the public from BME communities when they're thinking about joining the service. And you list historical perceptions, lived experiences of negative interactions with the police, local, national and international media reports on police injustice, the experiences of family and friends from other countries where police misconduct, corruption and brutality are widespread, a perception of bullying and harassment of black and minority ethnic communities by the police, and fear of being ostracised by family and friends. And what I wanted to ask you about is there a link between the perception that black and minority ethnic communities in Scotland have about the way they are policed and Police Scotland's ability to recruit from those communities?
Yes, they're directly linked, and it's not a surprise, and especially as our social media, everything else, we are now being filmed, and they see how people respond to innocent black people. It is something that has affected recruitment. And one of the major things about recruitment that I've been trying to explain for many a year is the people that are in the service are your ambassadors. You treat them right and it will organically grow. You don't need to have teams going out to look at minority ethnic, to get minority ethnic recruits. Their kids will join. Their cousins and aunties and uncles will join. So it's about treating the people right, the people who are there, because it's well documented that, particularly in policing, there is a direct link between people having people in their families who are from the service, and that have inspired them to join the service and stuff. So if you have, if the people who are currently there are not, don't think that they have the same experiences or that their careers are awesome, they will not inspire anybody in their communities to join.
So you've described a positive cycle where police
Yeah.
officers from Black and minority ethnic communities have a good experience at work, talk to their family friends about that, and their family and friends from the same community is more likely to sign up to be police officers.
Definitely. Just like in the dominant groups.
Is there then the reverse? Is that true? So if you have police officers from Black and minority ethnic communities who have a poor or discriminatory experience at work, go home, tell their family and friends, does that make it less likely that Police Scotland will be able to recruit from those communities?
Sadly, that is true. And we have officers amongst us who have openly said that they would not, because it is because of the racism they've suffered. They don't think they want to put their kids through that. So it's, it's directly linked. And that's why it's imperative that we treat the officers that we have with the respect and give them the sense of belonging that they would want to go out there and be ambassadors for the service.
At page 5 of your statement, looking at question 9, you give some details about statistics in Police Scotland. You say, unfortunately, Police Scotland has changed the classification of race/ethnic groups, so a real comparison is problematic. However, in 2015, the total number of BME officers, support staff and special constables was 1% of the total workforce. Up until 2018, we were only provided with percentages or ratios and not actual numbers. The latest published percentages show the number of Black and minority ethnic personnel is 1.57% of the total workforce, and white minority ethnic personnel is 2.83%. So we talked this lunchtime about the latest census figures that Nasamir had given evidence about, which was that Black and minority ethnic population of Scotland, so not including white minority ethnic, population of Scotland is around about 7%. It follows really, but do you agree that there is still some underrepresentation of minority ethnic personnel in Police Scotland?
Oh, definitely, yes. I am not necessarily one for numbers. To me, I might have a different view from a lot of the people. So what happens when you reach 7%, you stop recruiting? You know what I mean? It's bigger than numbers. And so I'm not hung up on it's 1.57 instead of 7. For me, it's about valuing people and everybody having the same experience of policing. So yes, there is an underrepresentation, and it's I know I go against the grain when I talk about representation at different levels, because I'm never sure that representation has ever solved anything. I think we need to go and treat everybody as individuals, rather than putting up one person to stand there. That's too much pressure on that one person for a start. And we as a minority group have too much to lose to have the wrong people represent us. So I'm not as hung up as many people, and I know it's a bit controversial that we get hung up on representation. It's never about numbers.
So, in your view, it doesn't solve the problem
It
to have
doesn't.
ethnic minority people in the higher ranks. Nonetheless, can I ask the question, is the underrepresentation of black and minority ethnic people different at different levels of the organisation?
Definitely. I also want to say that we've never joined policing in Scotland. We've never joined policing. We've never had a critical mass of minority ethnic people joining policing. So if it takes a white officer, 15 years to become a sergeant, and we have minority ethnic officers as chief superintendents, I don't think that's such a bad state of affairs at the moment. It's the big thing is, are we giving everybody the same opportunity to become a chief superintendent? If you get what I mean. So that for me is a big thing. Is that we've never had this critical mass of people joining, and people never started joining the service in any great numbers until around in the 1990s, if you know what I mean. So
I promised you I would come back to the topic of development opportunities and promotions. So now is that
Yes.
time. Can we look, please, at page 9 of the statement and your answer to question 14 at the top of the page? So question 14 is, what, if any, challenges does SEMPA face? And then if we could look at the top of page 9. You say the lack of data on the development of BME officers and staff is a particularly concerning area for us. The monitoring and dissemination of data on the training and developmental opportunities of minority groups should be a performance indicator for the service. In addition, priority ought to be given to the full adoption, analysis and reporting of exit interviews to better inform management of the service of the predominant issues that are persuading BME officers and police staff to leave. So is it correct to say you're flagging an issue here with unequal access to development opportunities?
Well, I can only, because there's no data around that, I have to rely on the anecdotal evidence that I've got.
And what does that anecdotal evidence tell you?
It is saying that they don't think they're getting the same level of exposure to development as their white counterparts. I'm particularly worried about no data surrounding that. We should be able to get how many minority ethnic people were supported to go for promotion, because you have to be supported. You can't just say I'm ready.
By supported, you mean you need a line manager?
Your line
sign off
manager to say
application?
you are ready. So it's something that is unique to policing, and so how many people were rejected? How many were supported? How many people do get trained in specialisms? At what stage of the promotion process do they fail? The ones that are supported, we don't have that data that would identify the problem, so we could deal with it. So I know I'm not a big fan of the lack of data that were published. So that's another bit of concern for me.
So if we look at on that issue, in your statement at page 16, please, and your answer to question 36. You're asked, what are the metrics you consider relevant to data monitoring of race and policing? And you've just explained that you have a concern about data gathering in general. And you say here that useful metrics we would recommend be disaggregated by race or ethnicity include A, subjects and victims of complaints and conduct and discipline procedures, B, subjects and victims of grievances, C, training received, D, hate crime and incidents against BME officers and staff, contextual data versus graphs, raw data showing locus, frequency and outcomes. E, employees off work due to stress and mental health issues. F, officers supported to apply for promotion. And G, grievances involving discrimination. So all these things that currently SEMPA is not able to access statistics or data relating to.
Yes. And if we do want to talk about equality of opportunities, we do need to have that kind of information on hand. For instance, if we're talking about promotion and development, if you have, I'm going to give you an instance, if you have courses that you've not been put on, it affects the positions you can go for. So for instance, we'd sit around our table at the executive meetings and you'd have, how many people have had a driving course? You'd hear, oh, my driving course was taken away 3 times from me. Now that might seem to someone as, it's just that. However, if you don't have your driving course, you can't go for specialist positions, so you can't go into firearms, you can't be CI. You know what I mean? So it's those little things that make people say they're not developed. And it makes sense because you need to get those competencies before you can apply for certain positions within the service. So if we had monitored training and development, we would notice, you have a high number of PME officers who haven't got their driving course. You see what I mean? So
if you were to say there's an underrepresentation of officers from black and minority ethnic backgrounds at this particular rank, but you look at the applications and you say, well, the reason why the white officer got that job and the black officer didn't was because the white officer had the driving qualification and the black officer did not. You could look at that and say, well, there's a concrete reason that's got nothing to do with race. Is what you're saying you have to look a step earlier in order to identify the patterns?
Yes. You need to talk about the equality of opportunities. Does everybody get a chance to go for that course, knowing full well that it would bar you from applying for other things? So these are the little things that you don't get if the data isn't disaggregated correctly. You know what I mean? So you see, this month we had 200 officers getting their driving course. You know, from this region we have X amount, and no one in there was BME officers. Then you know that you are going to have a problem when it comes to specialist units. And so those specialist units will not get the diversity they deserve, if you know what I mean. So it's those little things that if you don't have specific data, you cannot analyze why we're losing them, why they don't feel developed, why they don't feel that they're treated the same as everybody else.
And why at F is the metric you want officers supported to apply for promotion rather than officers succeeding in getting a promotion? Explain that distinction.
Oh, it has to be, because many officers will tell you that, my supervisor hasn't supported me for whatever reason that they can't come up with. Some of them will even go as far as say it's because of their race, and about the affinity bias, and I've spoken about that as well, is that we're all programmed to align with people who look like us, who have come from the same background and everything else, unless you're trained not to. So a lot of people think the support system, the system of you need support from your line manager to progress, it's real.
We had
It's real
evidence
for them.
from a former police officer who went into psychology, Dr.
Yeah.
Pete Jones, and he talked about affinity bias. He said it's an underpinning bias, and it is that if you look like me, sound like me, share my background, share my skin colour, I'm more likely to see you as one of those groups positively, which conversely means that people who are not like you tend to be seen less positively, and it underpins a lot of other biases. So other biases which then come in are driven by affinity bias and the fact that we like people who look like us. And is that what you're referring to
Yes.
when you say affinity bias?
That is real, and a lot of people aren't even aware of it, if you know what I mean. And it's the same thing. It's that very same thing that comes into representation, is that when you pick a female, we need to put her there because we need to have representation. And I'm using female because it's normally the case. She mirrors the men who are there because she needs to become one of them to get on. So you see why the whole concept of representation sometimes doesn't work. So there are females who will tell you that. Some of the worst bosses they've had are females because they need to mirror the behaviors of the men so they fit in and they can get on. So, it's a fine balance about in dealing with affinity bias, and a lot of these things are not conscious.
I want to move on to recommendations, so I make sure I have time to cover with you recommendations for future progress.
Yeah.
We've already touched on data, and that's what's up on the screen at the moment. We've spoken about Lady Angelini's review in 2020. Lady Angelini gave evidence to this inquiry as well, touching on her recommendation in relation to data collection in Police Scotland. She told us that proper data collection allows hotspots to be identified, patterns to be spotted, and allows analysis to take place. And then that analysis can lead into learning, which can result in fewer people dying. And I wondered if you'd agree with that as a statement of the importance of good data collection.
Definitely. And especially when you're in an organization as big as the police, you need to rely on that because you have no personal knowledge of everything that happens. So you need to talk about some of the trends and look out for the people who are marginalised. And that was one of my recommendations to Police Scotland in 2020 about, if we are so concerned about the effects of racism on policing, maybe it's time we talk about, we look at race in every aspect of policing, not forever, but for a short time, to say, do we have a problem? We can't, for instance, I know we've spoken about professional standards department, for instance, that we don't, they don't collect data on ethnicity. If we want to see that police officers from a different minority background is not disproportionately disciplined, or they're not in the system more than their white counterparts proportionately, we need to track that. I was very disappointed that we haven't. We still are not able to do that. And I'm just like, if this is important, that we will do that. So I think every part of policing should have that for a while, to see where we should put our efforts and our energies. the things that are important. I think it's time that we started using our data to improve services for the most marginalised people in policing.
You mentioned you made the recommendation in 2020, and I just want to put the document on screen. So it's WIT 0089, and it's a document entitled A Fairer, More Inclusive Police Service. And it's written, it says at the top, in response to the tragic events of May 25th, 2020 and the death of George Floyd. And it is a set of proposals for Police Scotland. And could you just explain the circumstances in which this document was put together?
Yes, well, it came about because of the scrutiny of policing around the world. So it was not just in the United Kingdom or in America. It was all over the world about how we police our minority ethnic communities, and about people having less confidence and trust in their police service. And so we thought it was important that we bring Police Scotland their processes under review, and think this is a time for us to show Police Scotland how they could respond to that challenge, the challenge of letting their communities, their minority ethnic communities, believe that they're being policed fairly. So I sent this to Police Scotland, and we did sit down with the Deputy Chief and the Chief.
So is that
to
both
go over
Fiona
them.
Taylor and
Fiona
Ian
Taylor and
Livingston?
Ian Livingston.
And can we please take a look at page 3 of the document and look at paragraph 6? And this just was really to check that this is, you mentioned that you made a recommendation in 2020, and it says at paragraph 6, in order to address the apparent lack of equal opportunity and disproportionate development of minority ethnic employees, all functions within SPA and Police Scotland to record ethnicity. This will enable the service to monitor, assess and take steps to resolve instances of inequity when they occur. And was this the recommendation
Yes.
that you were referring to?
Yes, and this is even within the promotion system, the assessment system, assessing you for promotion, within everything. If you're going to say we're not biased, where's the proof? So for me, it was a no-brainer.
And we've heard that Lady Angelini also made a recommendation about data collection in her 2020 report. And so you have expressed, is it fair to say, some disappointment that data collection is not where you want it to be at this point?
Yes, but also in terms of collecting data, and analysing it and disseminating it. This is a big thing. It's if we are a part of the police family, for instance, Semper Scotland, and we are a part of the police family, and we're working in partnership to be fairer, you need to give me those data. That is number one, to say how can we best collaborate and resolve this disproportionality all the time, and that's something that I've been talking about for a while, and I think the time is coming, and that Police Scotland has recognised that it's important because we're partners, and we need to sit around the table to have things like a retention strategy for minority ethnic officers, because the latest data shows that the attrition amongst BME officers is the highest. You know what I mean? So why are they coming in through one door and leaving through the next? Let's all sit down and talk about that. So you see what I mean? It's talking to the people who might be able to give you a clue.
And is that something you will be pushing for in your new role as well?
Yes, I think for this one, I'm pushing on an open door. I think they have recognized it. The management there at the moment have recognized that this is important, and it will be done. We are also aware of the limitations of the systems, of the ICT systems. But for me, there are not that many minority ethnic people in the service. So we could all fit in the lecture theatre, frankly. It's not that, it's not big an issue to overcome.
I want to pick up on a
barrier,
couple,
sorry.
sorry, I didn't mean to speak across you.
No.
I'd like to ask you about a couple of the other recommendations in this document.
Sure.
Could we scroll back to page 2, please? And have a look at paragraph 1. So paragraph 1 is an internal, what does VT stand for?
Oh, that's just a video.
Oh, I see.
Tip. It was about reaching out, engaging with the population of the police service.
I particularly wanted to ask you about, so you're talking about communicating various things.
Yes.
And I wanted to particularly focus on the third bullet point on the page, which is communicating Police Scotland to all employees at Police Scotland, the consequences for offenders and bystanders who breach the values of fair and equal practices that you've been referring to.
Yeah.
Now, we've spoken a great deal about offenders in terms of perpetrators of discriminatory behaviour today, and we've touched on bystanders, the difficulties that witnesses have in speaking out about what they observe. But I wonder if you could just speak a little bit more about the word bystander, because is there some implications to the term bystander? Why have you chosen that word?
Because they're not, it's just as in any incident that you're not involved, but you've seen it or you overheard it. And for me, that you are complicit in my eyes if you do nothing about it. And I've mentioned that before about not challenging the perpetrator. And I remember years ago, Stephen House, used to be the chief constable, used to say that to new recruits, is that you will be in trouble if you stand there and not say anything. And I just thought this is the time to remind people that it's your duty to step in and protect that person.
And what should the consequences be? Are you talking about disciplinary consequences for standing back and not protecting the person, the victim of discrimination?
I've always said it's not about putting someone through the disciplinary and conduct procedures. It's about admonishing that behaviour. So if it means just calling them and saying you did that and it's not appropriate, it's just admonishing it. So it's not about putting someone through the system, because that's not always appropriate. Sometimes it's not the normal behavior of the person. So to say that we have zero tolerance, that would mean every single incident is put through the conduct procedures. That is unhelpful.
So you think zero tolerance is a misnomer?
I think so. Every case must be judged on its own merit. But people must be alive to the consequences of breaching the values. And Police Scotland has it all over. These are our values. And for me, it's terribly important that there must be some comeback from you breaching that.
And does that include comeback for breaching the values when you're out and about policing as well as colleague to colleague? So if you have Officer A and Officer B, and Officer A sees Officer B committing a discriminatory act towards a member of the public,
yes,
what should Officer A do about that?
Well, I would expect Officer A to report it. Definitely. Because that's his role as a police officer. So you should, I know it's frowned upon that people don't corroborate with what they call them neighbors, what your neighbors say happen. But there are a number of officers who are like, I am not going to let that go without pointing it out.
Officer A reports Officer B's discriminatory conduct towards the member of the public, what would you expect Police Scotland to do about that?
Well, I would expect them to investigate it and apply the necessary admonishment, in my eyes. So, be it going down the disciplinary route, having more training. You know what I mean? I expect that because the role of constable is too important. It's just too important for people to go below the standards that's expected and just disappear. It's just too important.
Explain why you say that. Why is the role of constable too important to allow a police officer to fall below the expected standard?
Because a police officer, the powers that a police officer has, they're wide-ranging. A police officer can take away my human right of liberty. And so it sets you aside from a social worker, someone in education. The police service sets the tone for society. Every time you're rebuilding a country, the first thing they do is rebuild law and order. You don't see them saying, okay, let's gather up social services. And I'm not being glib about it. It's because you set the tone for society, and what you permit is what you promote. So if we're going to see everybody is policed with dignity and respect and by consent, and that we give the same service to everybody, when you have rogue cops go out there and don't live your values, what you're saying is they're not really values. They're things that we call upon when we feel like. You see what I mean? So it's a message it sends that the office of constable is special. You are the person who we rely on in our worst moments. I have nobody to call but you. So I need you to serve me. So it's, so sometimes we miss the whole thing about serving and why we're there. And so for me, being involved in policing, I thought it was a privilege that we are setting this tone for society about morals and ethics, and we should never forget that.
You've spoken about the risks for people who report discrimination, either as witnesses or as victims of discrimination, that they might be isolated or have other negative consequences. Now we're talking about recommendations. I wondered if you had any suggestions as to what Police Scotland could do as an organisation to protect those who speak up about discrimination.
Well, I fully intend to send my recommendations across, as we mentioned, new recommendations, new set of recommendations. But there are little things that we need to Police Scotland need to sit down and review. One of them is the use of the control and command approach to leadership. It is right for operational reasons, but in a human resource, it's an HR setting, in an employment setting, that should be relaxed because it stifles challenges, it stifles freedom of thought, and it makes people not challenge bad behavior because this person is a higher rank. And from you step into policing, you are told that this person is, it's yes sir, no ma'am, that kind of thing. And this person is who you look up to, you obey without dissent. And it is something that I think is necessary operationally, but it does have something to do with the fear of challenging someone who is in a higher rank than yourself.
And then just staying in the same document, if we could, and looking at page 4. Your recommendation at paragraph 13 is the introduction of psychometric testing for potential recruits to better evaluate the predominant attitudes and behaviours. And I wondered if you could set out for us how psychometric testing for applicants to the police service might work and what the advantages would be in your view.
Yes, this is how serious I think the Office of Constable is, and the powers that go with a warrant card, is that you must have the necessary moral and ethical thoughts and actions, because the minute you take that oath, you're an exemplar of standards. And I know that there are private sector organizations and even some public sector organizations that do psychometric tests because you need the right people in terms of working in a team, you know what I mean? And Police Scotland, before it became Police Scotland, I know I was a part of it. ACPOS, the chief police officers, they teamed up with psychiatrists and psychologists from the universities, and they did a psychometric test for new recruits called the critical thinking tool. That was, it was piloted by the East Forces. That was Lothian and Borders, Fife, Central and Dundee, Tayside. And it was about giving people tests that would flag up behaviours that might not be conducive to being a police officer. So behaviours like giving you more information and see if you change your mind about a situation, which is terribly important when we talk about police officers, because you must be able to change your mind with more information. And they would just give a little flag to that recruit. It's not to say that that person can't be a good police officer, but it's just the usual term, red flag, that perhaps this person might need a little more training and that kind of thing. And I thought that was absolutely fabulous because of the interaction and at the times of interaction, because nobody calls the police when they're having a good time, is about the necessary attributes and decision-making scenarios that make you a good officer. So I think that should be brought back, and I think it's too important. And most importantly, again, I'm using the word important because everything about this whole, the role of a police is important, is the premise that you are different, the premise that we rely on you, and your one failure could be detrimental to a lot of people. So I actually do think it's important that we look at introducing that. And also with culture change and the people coming into a setting like shifts and groups, which is a big part of response policing, is, are you team players? Are you know what I mean? It's your mindset. And the only way we'll have widespread culture change is with new recruits coming along that are suited for the service and what we want, the vision of policing.
And is psychometric testing apt to select out candidates who hold racially discriminatory views, or is that not what it's looking for?
It's not necessarily looking at that, because people are way too clever to do that in an interview. But it are the markers that you are hard and fast about your views on things.
So people who are kind of closed-minded
yes,
and entrenched in their
precisely
views might be identified in a psychometric test.
So it was, the test that they had called the critical thinking tool was very clever in bringing that out. And I would hope that they would revive that and look at possibly trialing it again.
So I'd like to ask you some questions. My last line of questions is about your new role. So you're a fair play advisor.
Yes.
What does fair play mean?
It's about fairness and impartiality in the processes within policing. Because of where we are right now, in the landscape right now, we're going to look at discrimination in terms of your identity, your race. So it's about, do you think that you were fairly treated when you brought inappropriate behavior to the service? Do you think the promotion system, do you think the development system is fair? Where does it let down minority groups? So it's wide-ranging, and I know we are not going to go in the initial 2 years. We might be so caught up with cases, with discrimination cases, that we are not looking externally. But my vision is about things like racial profiling, because I am particularly passionate about that, and I can see where I'm not sure it is giving the gravitas it deserves, because with racial profiling in service delivery, it sets the tone of how you see policing. You know what I mean?
So you envisage the new role as allowing you to interrogate fairness in policing as well as fairness for the police officers who you would have represented in SEMPA?
Yes, so I will not be sitting down doing the cases, as that's a thing for SEMPA and the Federation. I'd be looking at the outcomes of cases and of the current procedures.
Is it a full-time role?
Yes, it is.
You've sent the inquiry a list of your key functions and key responsibilities, effectively your job description. And are you happy for those to be disclosed?
Yes, there's no secret.
Thank you. So looking at the remit of the role that you've sent us, you'll be leading on ensuring that Police Scotland demonstrates a full commitment to upholding the principles of fair play and the broader theme of equalities. Now, is this role just about race, or is it about all protected characteristics?
Well, the role itself is about all protected characteristics. Because I keep saying, oh, the landscape right now, there is the house of race is on fire, so to speak. We might be concentrating on that as it needs attention right this very minute. However, everybody will be encouraged to put forward their cases. And I've always been someone who looks out for social justice, so I've gone in for disability and LGBTI and those kinds of things. However, for the moment, I think for the first year or so, we'll be concentrating a lot on issues of race that are considered unfair or by the people who have brought them.
Do you have any concerns that your ability to focus on the issues of race that are considered unfair, that are brought to you, might be diluted, or you might be pulled in different directions as your remit has expanded to cover other protected characteristics as well?
Well, I am hoping we'll get the resources, so it is not. I'm not being pulled in all directions. So it's just time will tell, frankly. But for the moment, I'm excited about it because I think it's something that policing has needed for a long time. A person who would come and look at some of these practices and procedures from a different perspective.
So you say you're excited about the role. Tell us a little bit about what you're hoping to achieve. What are your aims and ambitions for your new position?
Well, I'm hoping that we could redress some of the balance that was not there in my eyes and in the eyes of the minority ethnic officers who think perhaps their case wasn't given the gravitas it deserves or was not scrutinized in the way it should be. So I'm hoping that I would bring something to it. And because of the reporting procedures, and for instance, my reports go to the Deputy Chief Constable.
And is that equivalent to your level of access through SEMPA or above or below?
It will be available for the senior management team to consider. I think it will give a lot of confidence to the minority ethnic officers and staff to see that these reports are recorded and are viewed, read, and actioned by the Deputy Chief Constable, who is the arbiter of everything that is in the complaints, discipline, grievance portfolio.
And do you think there's any risk of you being less able to provide constructive challenge from within the organisation compared to what you're able to do from outside in SEMPA?
I am hoping there are no risks, but I actually think right now I am getting the support that I think is necessary to make this a success. But as you know, policing is transient. The minute this person moves, you know what I mean? So I am hoping it doesn't affect it, but it's just wait and see.
Just give me a moment, please. Thank you. I've got no further questions. Thank you.
Could I, excuse me, pick up with you about conduct driven by stereotypes? And you gave the example of a black woman at the airport who might come under suspicion. And then you explained that such activity at the airport might be driven by intelligence and so forth. Can I leave aside that kind of example and look at the matter as a generality? If it can be demonstrated that conduct is driven by a stereotype, I'm wondering what Police Scotland could do to deal with that and prevent it from happening again, and whether the conduct regulations, for example, would have an input into that, or are there more general issues?
Well, I think if it's not acknowledged that people act on their stereotypes, we all do, every last one of us, that's what keeps us safe at night. However, in our professional lives, we need to have that voice that reminds us that it's just your stereotype. Some people possess it, some people don't. However, if Police Scotland gives officers, in particular response officers, and leaders who make policies and decisions, if we give them that training, we give them those skills and that knowledge to understand that their reactions might be based on their stereotypes, we'll never ever get there. And that's why I keep talking about unconscious bias training, or as some people call it, unchallenged or implicit bias. If we're not aware of it, we go on doing what we've always done before. And so I think the role Police Scotland can play in making people aware of these biases that we have, that we're born with. And most importantly, if you live in a developed first world country where you've only known minority ethnic people through television, of people begging or whatever, or, you know what I mean? Those little stereotypes in your head will never go away. You will have things like, you know, minority ethnic people are always unfairly treated in the justice system, or play a big role in the justice system. Most of them are disproportionately incarcerated, and those things. There is an unconscious thing about that. So you don't know what you don't know. And I think it's a responsibility of the service to educate people about that, to give them time to sit down and process those thoughts, and to give them the tools to identify when they're doing it, give them the tools to address it, and that's the role that they can play, because it's involved in almost every interaction that you have with the public.
And if having done that, the conduct persists based on stereotypes, how do you deal with that?
Well, they call me affectionately Sandra. I am thinking that maybe this, the police service isn't for you. There are some people who are too focused, there's some people who are untrainable, in other words, and lack the necessary understanding of why the police is so important, the office of constable is so important. So there's some people who I think are just not fit for certain roles. And I know that might sound harsh, but in reality, it's for every job. Every job, there's some people who are not best suited for it. And I think in 21st century policing, there are a set of values, there are a set of characteristics that are necessary to do your job. And if you cannot distinguish behaviors based on individuals rather than your interpretation of a group of people, maybe this isn't the role for you. And Police Scotland should look at that. And I know one of the things that I often talk about is the attraction of policing to some people. And I often tell senior leaders that we need to be alive to the fact that some people join policing because of the access to power that it gives them. Just like, you know, there are some people who want to hang around kids for less than virtuous reasons. It's the same thing with policing. So you'll find some people who like the power and the access that police gives them to power. And we must be aware of that. And I just think that it's time policing recognize that there are some people who are not fit for that role.
Thank you. Are there any Rule 9 applications? No. Well, that brings your evidence to an end, Mr. Deslandes-Clark. And I'm very grateful to you for coming to give evidence to the inquiry. Thank you very much, and for all the preparation that you put in order to give evidence. We're about to adjourn for the day, and you'll then be free to go.
Thank you.
We're adjourned until tomorrow at 10 o'clock.